So my name is Harmon Moon. I am a U3 history student. And last year I was one of the co-founders of the anti-strike group known as WATAC. I think those are all open qualifications.
Yeah, I'm Robin Reid-Fraser. I'm the VP External of the SSMU for this year. And you can see from my red square how I stand on education stuff. So I'll be talking more soon.
Hi everyone. I really don't like introducing myself because I think that's really weird. I'm going to do it anyways. My name is Shyam. I'm a student in marketing. It's my 4th year. So I feel like a dinosaur sometimes, but I still think I look young, hopefully. And you can also tell by my red square where I stand in the position.
Do we have any initial questions, thoughts? Oh yeah, well, I mean, obviously people, that's pretty simple. I think we all know each other relatively well, we have college meetings. And just, that's it really. I mean, we have a lot of relevant experience, we have a lot of knowledge, we have a lot of perspectives, and we can all share them. That's all too nice. So, back to Ben.
I just want to ask the panelists if they're the people.
So you guys have a preferred part for this? I don't even.
The
Facilitators, panelists, whatever.
What is your general impression now that Richard County has college? I guess we'll start with this part.
What do you mean by general impression?
Like, what are your thoughts? Just my thoughts. Yeah, just obviously you were invited to do your expertise and also representation of certain ideas that other students are having and other people are having. So, from your perspective, how do you feel about all this?
I mean, you have to give the strikers full credit, right? They won. They got what they wanted, and or at least they sort of fulfilled the base requirement for what they wanted. From what I understand now is, especially with the subject of the market today, is all the bits about, like on each day, so it's, I mean, for that side of the argument, and I'll, leave it to the other two to sort of expand on that, but certainly they've made big progress in the goals. As to where that leaves everybody nowadays, that's a little bit of an interesting question, because it is going to be a question now of, now that the Quebec government, actually most of the Quebec government can't depend on, or at least can't look forward to an increase in income from those community rights. Now, to sort of deal with a massive deficit, to deal with economic problems, where are they going to look for other sources of income? Is it going to be added taxes? Is it going to be some sort of, is the plan no, going to go forward and try to bring in income from the royalties there? It's a bit of an uncertain future for the VP right now, so.
Yeah. So I don't know, some sort of similar thoughts to Harmon. I mean, I think as much as we know that the hike has been canceled, there are still quite a few uncertainties. So really all we know at this point is that the plan going forward is to have the summit about education, which is supposed to, there still aren't that many details coming out about what that exactly is going to look like or who are going to be at the partner table. I mean, they have said that they're going to, I think, have like 1/3 students, 1/3 government, and 1/3 kind of other members of society. But we still don't know how those representatives are going to be chosen, where exactly they're going to come from, the themes of the conference, but basically the intention with that conference, or the hope, is to come up with thoughts about how to fund education without this big hike and without protocol, and what kind of tuition hikes might go into place. So, for example, there's been a lot of talk about the possibility of indexing tuition to inflation. So I think that definitely a time of kind of uncertainty. And certainly I can understand why there is a lot of concern on the part of universities and other groups that were sort of counting on the tuition hike to put a lot more funding back into universities. But yeah, I don't know. I think we do need to sort of wait and see. But I think that in general, this could be a time to sort of open up the conversation beyond just like that specific tuition hike and look at things like, look at like university governance, for example, and university spending. I mean, that was something that came up in one of the rounds of negotiations was when the Liberals were still in government, was to maybe do a real examination of university governance and spending and see how they might be able to reduce fees by looking at that. And so I think that would be an important conversation to have because there is consistently talk of like this massive funding deficit that we have to universities, but like where exactly should that money go, and like are there ways that universities are maybe spending money that are like sort of kind of unnecessary spending that they're doing that could maybe be reducing more on the university's parts and kind of changing around their funding structure so that they wouldn't even require as much money as they would have been getting from the tuition thing.
I definitely feel the same as Robin, but I think for me, all of the students who have made a lot of ground, specifically in government, within tuition at the moment, I still think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. As you can see, there's a demo happening tonight, this afternoon, so the students are still participating in these movements because it goes beyond and above just tuition hikes. For me personally, the reason why I support opposition to tuition hikes is I think it marginalizes a lot of important groups in society, primarily women, people of color, fearful, individuals, and so forth. And I also think because of that, the education system needs to be reformed because even though tuition is frozen or totally frozen, those issues still are relevant. It doesn't mean that people of color are being treated differently at the education level. So I think that's something that we need to look into a lot more. And I think the way the classroom structure is for that program also needs to be sort of evolved because there needs to be more sort of practical experience, I think, especially at McGill. And we need to also focus a lot on loans and financial aid because loans, yes, they're great, but they also lead to massive debt. And individuals sometimes find that inaccessible. Personally, I find it very inaccessible as well. So looking at those sort of financial models, how are we going to make it so that there is financial aid for students? I think it's an issue of class. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar, but when you're applying for loans, your parents need to have a certain sort of income limit, and if your parents are just like $1 over that limit, you're now eligible for those loans. And that's really definitely an issue for especially students who have a working class family, because loans are not that easy to get, and we have to try to pay them off. So if you can think about the student who's working really hard to pay their own tuition, it almost becomes impossible. And I also think students
So it had, I think it had been, 30, but I believe that it has been increased because of one of the changes that the Liberals did make before they lost power, and one that has been maintained at least for this year is that they did put a bunch more money into financial aid. They put close to $40,000 more into financial aid, or not 40,000, 40 million.
That would be really kind of sad.
every student financially. And they did increase the income cutoff, so I think it might be 45,000. Yeah.
But there are still merit-based grants that are offered to students. There are, and I'm just really, is financially really the best way to attack the executive model, or do you go to more like maybe third model or lower base tuition model? Because while I know I got financial aid my first year of it, and it certainly helped, I don't know if, because it doesn't cover all of it all the time, and students still can't find like that, which are obviously because they're both, and even with some money, even like students doesn't like make their, is that really the best model, or should there be something else that is a better?
So I personally am in favor of a sort of freer educational model because I think it does work. Countries like France have proven that it does. But I think it's going to take a lot of work to get there, and that's something I'm happy to admit. The reason why I agree with freer educational model because I personally think if you're already at university, you're somewhat privileged, right? Like you have a privilege to be here. So for me, student movement is about those students who can't already come to school and who aren't at university and are trying to get in. As we saw with today's previous speaker, in the Aboriginal community, we see how many students can come to university, and for me, that's what the fight is for. So I think a freer education would be better. Specifically at McGill, I think financial aid, it's good, and I think it's an excellent step forward, but it's also very problematic because you have to maintain a certain GPA, and I know friends who have to work as well in addition to their studies, and it's tough to maintain like a GPA of 3.6 on a semesterly basis. And as soon as you drop that GPA, there goes your financial aid. So I don't think it definitely solves all the issues.
Yeah, I think as well that basically I'm also more favorable to free education and using a much more progressive income tax or tax system because I believe that at least in terms of loans, I think that just the issue of debt is one that's really scary to a lot of people right now, particularly because we are in this kind of time of economic uncertainty. We've got a federal government that's cutting jobs, funding for organizations and stuff all over the place, and there are increasing rates of unemployment for young people. So although you can like defer starting to pay back the interest on your loans for 6 months in Quebec after you've graduated, that's still a lot of pressure to actually go about finding a job and then be prepared to do that. I think that like and kind of even if free education itself is a possibility, even if accessing loans is something that is maybe necessary, I feel like just having a tie to a bank and having to pay interest on a loan is one of the things that's like the most unfair and the most debilitating. I mean, this is something where not only are you leaving university having to pay for however much that you've borrowed just to pay for your university, but then you have to pay interest on top of that. And I feel like that's just ridiculous because if the longer that it takes to pay back that loan, the more the interest accumulates, which I feel like is just inherently unfair. It's like you're paying for the service of borrowing money because you don't have enough money to pay in the first place, and it just seems like a very messed up system. So I think that if there is going to be a financial aid system like that, where it involves borrowing money and then paying it back, it would be much better to just have it as zero interest. So, if it could be something that's directly through the government or something, where you don't have a relationship to a financial institution that's charging you interest, then that would be considerably better. But just in general, I think that to be burdened with that much debt coming right out of university, I mean, that's something that we're hearing stories in other parts of Canada and in the UK and in the US where people are delaying buying houses, starting families, getting married, all of these things that you want to be able to kind of look forward to in terms of having kind of a settled adult life after you graduate from university, and not just like having this barrier of like $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 that you need to pay back to the bank before you can really do anything else with yourself. And then what does that mean in terms of the kind of work that people are going into? Are they settling for jobs with like worse working conditions or lower wages just because they're really desperate to get a job so that they can start paying that back? I think that those are a lot of the issues that come up with financial aid. So yeah, basically I don't think it's good enough.
I mean, my problem with the freer education model is that I mean, I don't really want to get into a stats war here, but I think that it's, in theory at least, very inefficient. Because it is this sense that it's taking a lot of, like, putting a burden on the tax base to put a lot of money into universities. And by the way, I mean, money into universities is always good, but it is making it so that a lot of people have to support something that not necessarily everybody wants. Like, I'm going to try to explain my thinking here because I realize that it comes off as a little, like, it's a little bit not evident what I'm doing. But I would think that I think, in my experience at least, university is not something for everybody. As in, it's something that I seriously consider not doing myself. It's things that, my father was a SSMU dropout, stuff like that. So I think there are avenues to success that don't necessarily require an education degree, that people are happier going without, that people don't necessarily want to go through this structure in order to pursue what they want to do. So I think what the model that should be aimed for is that people that want to go to university absolutely should have the opportunity, which means that I feel that it's more efficient and it makes more sense to have targeted bursaries, so that the people that do want to go, they get a lift up. I agree that loans are problematic, 100%, and I think we've seen in the US that student debt is out of control. It really is becoming exploitative. And so, but I would support, something like you were saying, a zero interest kind of loan, something like that is still not ideal. Ideally, it would be something just like straight up bursary, where there is, the money is put forward, no expectation of payback, and then just sort of propelling people again that want to go through the services that they want to be provided with.
An interesting idea that I know has been kicked around a little bit, and I think is in place in certain countries, but I don't know which ones, is the idea of loan repayment being tied to future income. Is that a reasonable model, or is that not necessarily the best way either? I don't think anyone mentioned that.
That seems just like a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare.
It doesn't look good if it works, kind of thing.
That means that you have to track every single student that's taken out a loan right up until they hit some sort of steady career or something like that. Maybe it would work. It seems a little bit like too much effort.
Comments? Anyone else is also welcome to speak to
I had a
yeah.
question for the two of you. How do you respond to people who say that free education would increase taxes, and as Harmon mentioned, it doesn't make sense for people to be taxed for something that's not necessarily in the entire nation's interest, or just like, how do you respond to people who say taxes aren't the right option, and that's why the only feasible way to have free education free education is to tax, and that's not appropriate? Like, how do you respond to that?
Sorry, can I just? I didn't quite say that.
Okay, sorry.
Not in the nation's interest. Like, absolutely, education is in the nation's interest.
Yeah.
It's just not something that everybody wants to see.
Okay. Sure.
Anything for
Yeah. I'm not sure if, I could respond maybe a bit to what Harmon said, and then also to that. I think that Harmon makes a fair point in saying that not everybody wants to go to university. Obviously, there are things like people who want to go to trade school or just start a small business or something like that. Like definitely there are things that people want to do that don't require an academic background. But I don't think that just saying that we shouldn't fund education is really the answer. I think that we should think about our education system a little bit more and maybe how we could change it so that it is something that makes sense for more people. I mean, for example, I know that you said that your father was a CEGEP dropout, but I think that the CEGEP model is sort of an interesting example where it is a very a considerably more accessible form of education. It's a lot cheaper, and there are a lot more options in terms of the kind of programs that you can go into. Certainly one thing that I think is really valuable is things like co-op programs, or maybe if if there was more exploration, sort of building on what Shyam said about making education a little bit more practical, and maybe looking at more interdisciplinary kind of integration. Obviously, you as basic folks have some thoughts about that. But I think that if we can sort of also think about, if we want to make education more accessible, then sort of bring it out of the ivory tower a little bit more, and make it so that, even if people are interested in going to technical school or, having a small business or a restaurant or, something like that, then having the possibility of taking some of the classes that we get in university. I mean, thinking about, the courses about sociology or economics or various cultural studies, or especially a lot of these things that people sort of think of as being soft disciplines, and oh, what are you going to do with that degree? All you can do is become a teacher or an academic, and it's not related to the real world. But I think that those kind of courses and that kind of learning provides a really good framework to kind of analyze and critique the world around us, and can just sort of help us to sort of think about the world that we want to build. And I think that just having that kind of background and access to that kind of information is really useful in terms of just empowering people to kind of think about the way they want to operate as citizens of the world. So whether that requires having a 4-year degree or something, I don't think that everybody should necessarily be expected to sit in a classroom for 4 years, because not everybody learns like that. But I think that some of these things that we do have these universities that we do kind of have the privilege of being part of could be opened up a little bit more. I could also talk about the tax stuff, but it seems like this is an interesting thing we want to keep talking about. So, Lila, did you?
No, I'll let Shyam.
I'll be super brief because I'm actually very interested in hearing what everyone else has to say about it. But I think the best way to think about it is that education is a collective effort, because the university goes above and beyond just the students. Students are an integral part, but we have a lot of community members, like the Milton Park community. We have alums that drop by all the time. I think we can do a little bit more, in my opinion. But universities are not just students. There are teachers here, so there's much more to universities than just academic form. So for me, putting money into education is a collective effort, and I think we all have to pitch into that. And I do think it's in the interest of society to sort of make it a collective effort, because we're creating student leaders and student makers who are one day going to be more than just students.
I just wanted to also go off what Robin was saying, that absolutely agree that the way that universities are structured now is very much ivory tower, inaccessible stuff like that. And we are stuck in this idea that people have to do, pure science, pure history, that there is no overlap between disciplines. And that's where you get this idea that,
all connected.
Yeah, exactly,
In the real
right?
world.
Yeah, exactly. So people who go, what are you going to do with a degree in philosophy? Well, there are lots of things you can do with a degree in philosophy. Philosophy has so many other things, right? So absolutely, there are all sorts of problems with the way university is structured nowadays. So that go beyond just, funding. So absolutely, I agree that we do need to look at how we educate.
I know that I know at least one university in the U.S. does a very mandatory co-op part of your degree. It sounds like something that everyone
Waterloo does that
supporting.
too.
Yeah, Waterloo does as well, I think. Northwestern does? Eastern does. Yes, it does. I find it. Is that? It sounds like something that everyone would be interested in doing or interested in integrating. But I'm kind of curious as to how one would do that for degrees like sociology, philosophy. Any thoughts from anyone about that? Kind of off the wall, but because it's kind of complicated. I mean, this school has to build these relationships with these firms that are going to take in students on the premise that, okay, you might be educating a future employee, or you're, educating a future company's employee.
I mean, I think that, for example, Cuberg has kind of an interesting model in the CURE program, right? Where it's the Community University Research Exchange. So it's community organizations that need some kind of research done. Yeah. And so they take on a student, and that student gets to be involved with what that community group is doing, and also get academic credit for that. So I think that that's another one way. We should think about kind of beyond just sort of the typical workplaces that we think about in terms of big office buildings or whatever, but thinking about are there community organizations, nonprofits that are doing work that could use someone like a psychologist or a sociologist to kind of think about, okay, how is this work impacting other people, and are there ways that it could be improved, doing that kind of thing. In terms of, I think that that's a format that is good. And I mean, if we thought about I think that thinking about applications for some of these disciplines that are thinking about a little bit outside the box would be interesting. I mean, if you take I don't know, a philosopher to a construction site, what would happen? What would they come up with? Just being in a space that's very different from a library, what would happen there? Well, that could be a cool experiment, right? And I think that kind of ties into this idea that I'm obviously sort of in love with, of just really having kind of interdisciplinary work. And I think that that's useful to sort of also start to break down these barriers between blue collar workers and academics, and thinking about, these kind of frames of analysis that you come up with when you're in university, when you're in some of these deep thinking classes. How can those apply to everyday situations where they might not be put to use a lot?
It's very funny that we've kind of shifted from that really Quebec specific accessibility issue, because I don't think I mentioned this, but the group that kind of this is the CISA thing, yeah. This is the CISA thing, yeah. It stands basically for it's a bunch of Canadian interdisciplinary programs is putting this together, and they love these innovative ideas of education. So I think it's really funny that we shifted away towards their goal in life.
It's very interesting because I don't know all the programs very well, but basic arts and science at McGill is one such program. There's KI, Knowledge Integration at Waterloo. There's a program at McMaster called ISI, and these are all kind of integrated programs that combine already existing disciplines explicitly, so as to give students an interdisciplinary background and perspective on things, of which McGill is only one. So yeah, like Kate said, it's interesting.
Philosophy students to go to construction sites on a regular basis.
Yeah, we haven't gotten quite that far yet.
What happens when you throw philosophy student in a construction site?
Well, I mean, there's the
project for the year.
Seriously, but there was that Boss show where they put management workers in
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What was
They put the CEO to work on like the
Yes.
assembly line or
And
The
something.
then-
undercover boss. that
Let's
was
bring
it.
the construction workers to philosophy class too.
Yeah,
Why
well,
not?
I mean, that's actually, if we're gonna return to the discussion, like, that's another thing. We already heard that sometimes people don't really think about university, they don't think of it as a possibility, or they just don't even really understand how to even get there from where they are. So do you think there's a problem here in Quebec or generally with getting people who are families, getting people from working class to be interested in university and then to go to university? Is that an issue
I
at
mean,
all, or?
Can I just say one last thing,
Yeah, of
what we were just talking about before addressing the question? I also think one thing to think about with interdisciplinary programs is or at least one issue to tackle is this problem of marks. Because people, like a GPA becomes a problem because people start thinking, I'm not going to experiment, right? I'm not going to, like take me for example, I'm in history. And I stopped with the hard sciences when I was in high school. And I mean, and it's one of those things where if it was, like, I'm not taking a lot of hard sciences for like sort of other reasons, there's like kind of restrictions and so on, but it would be very hard for me to get back into the hard sciences because like, I have no experience in them anymore. And trying to find, so for people like me, for people that are, very hard science or very hard arts, which I don't think is anybody's ever said before, very strongly in one thing or another, to get them to be willing to try out other things, they have to be in a space where they know, because if I take a science course, I go, this is going to hit my GPA, I'm going to get like a C+ in this or whatever, and then that's, there go my future opportunities and so on. So people do need to, for an interdisciplinary program, be able to think about, not what's this going to do to my grade, but what can this do for me? So that's just so there is a bit of a security issue, so to speak. What's the question?
I was going to say, do you want to jump up on that?
Like, if you guys could build on those.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, back home, I think that, there are a lot of different reasons that people don't go to university, but back home, I've got a lot of friends who didn't go to university either because they just were able to find a job or a field that interests them and that they can get a job in right away that doesn't require a university degree, which is super lucky and super awesome. Not a lot of people are in that position. But also because just kind of classroom learning isn't the right setting for them. And I think that that's something that I certainly know that I have friends who even in high school had a really hard time with just kind of sitting in class and being talked at. So I think that when we think about access, the financial barriers are definitely a big one. So are things like, what's the background that you come from, what's the kind of travel that you would have to do, do you feel comfortable kind of going from your maybe small community to travel to a much bigger city where you would need to kind of get used to that, be on your own sort of thing. But then also I think just the setting itself of sitting in lectures for however many hours a week, that's definitely something that a lot of people struggle with.
So like you said how your friends get offered jobs right when they come out of high school, so they don't feel the need to come to college. If there wasn't that barrier, don't you think they would have? And if they didn't excel that way, don't you think it's a waste of government money, an investment in them, when they easily could have just excelled in the job that they'd already gotten?
Sorry,
So when people get offered jobs right when they come out of high school, and they prefer taking that over sitting in the classroom where they probably won't excel, and there's a monetary barrier to that, where they're like, you know what, I don't want to spend money on something that won't even do it for me. But when it's free, it's well, why not? Why not try it out? But that's the government investing in you, and then maybe it doesn't work out for you, and then you just go back to what you already did. Don't you feel like that was kind of a waste of an investment?
No. I don't think that any kind of I think that there could be a lot gained from university education, whether you end up going into a particular sort of job or not, you know? I mean, we see just kind of within the different faculties that exist, you know? Like, there are some faculties that are very much geared towards a certain type of job. So, like, you know, engineering is a really good example of that. But things like, yeah, kind of these, like, softer disciplines, like in arts or whatever, there are a lot of people who will end up doing something that really doesn't have anything to do with what they learned. But, you know, I think that it's just kind of the same idea of having things like research and writing skills, things like just, yeah, ways of thinking about the world, having access to even other resources that, so maybe you like read, you know, some really interesting stuff by a philosopher, you know, just, and then like that's, I mean, just opening up kind of that sort of academia that exists and having those resources available, and then starting to think and making use of those. Maybe, you know, maybe not very much, maybe not specifically in the field that you're going into, but then just like having those as potential resources, I think that's super valuable. I mean, a lot of my kind of personal view of the world and the way that I think that things should be going is much more about empowering people. So I think that education is one of the foundations of that. And so folks who, you know, maybe kind of come from a really low income background, think that they're just sort of destined to work at McDonald's all their lives. Well, you know, if they have a chance to start to like do some learning and gain some of that knowledge, then maybe they'll feel like there are other things that they could be doing, and then start to kind of build networks or find resources that will help them to change the way they're living.
I know that a lot of like what we're talking, sorry, go ahead. And like what a lot of people are talking about seems to need to happen at like an administrative level or at an institutional level. Is there anything that you guys think that students just generally can do to implement these changes or to kind of push these changes forward or actually impact this kind of problem accessibility? It's kind of a tricky question because yeah, of course.
First of all, I want to say that what you brought up was really valid, and I'm actually really happy that you brought up. It's a new perspective for me as well. I don't know your name, so that's fine.
Leslie.
Okay, Leslie. So thank you for that. To address some of the concerns, I think for what Robin said, there needs to be this shift of why universities exist. Because I know when I first came, it was to get a job, right? And I think that's what most students' end goal is, and I don't think it's a student's fault that that's their end goal. I think that's how society is structured. It's graduate, get a job as soon as you can, make some money, and live the life. And that's not for everyone. But we also have to try to understand, like, why do universities exist above and beyond getting a job? Are you here to actually learn? And for me, that's what it is. It's to learn things that I wouldn't necessarily be able to learn otherwise. Especially working with a teacher, right? I feel like they have that knowledge that they can transfer onto me or other students, and in a way that's not like pushing their opinions, but also like showing different sides. Like what we're doing today, I think, is what's needed in the classroom, right? Like we have individuals from different sides of the table offering opinions, and we're learning from that. That's what I think needs to be replicated elsewhere in the classroom, because universities are, for me, like a learning experience. It's thinking outside of your boundaries and thinking from someone else's perspective, which I don't think we do often. But I think we want to respond to.
Well, I'm just putting off your question.
Yeah, no. I think that can be delayed for as long as we need. I know that we have another like 15 minutes if you guys are still free, and then we probably should take a break because we have one more speaker who talked for a very long time.
I mean, like I do want to keep going off that and saying it's really unfortunate that a university degree is considered, it's almost like a 4-year bonus to your paycheck. And people, and I mean, I've had universities sold to me as like people coming up and saying, go to university because that's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars more in income. And that's, you know, which is certainly true, but shouldn't be the reason that people go to university. And it's also unfortunate that it's becoming harder and harder to find a job without a university degree. And that's also something I've been hearing. And it's becoming, and that also hits at the accessibility issue, because it becomes that people, if you view a university degree as nothing more but a way to ensure that you have a job, then yes, it is like, yes, it is bad that you have to pay thousands of dollars for that. Yes, it is bad that the government doesn't, like, if you think that university is one of the only ways that you can get a good job, then it does become a certain amount of burden on other organizations, such as government, to make sure that you can get a good job, something like that. Right? So if you're looking at it that way, then that's simply true. From the, so, and I mean, this goes back to what we were saying about sort of like reform and so on, and that the way it's structured now has a lot of problems. So it's certainly more like handling it from a more intrinsic idea of education, from a more workable, integrated, realistic almost, sort of non-ivory tower, non-elitist way of looking of handling education, and that should definitely as a whole work with.
Yeah, I guess just a quick comment. I think the issue of, educational inflation is very, very interesting, like you said. I think that's something that maybe doesn't get as much attention as it deserves, because it used to be, in our parents' time, that a high school diploma was what you needed to graduate to get what was considered a good job. And now it's become the university degree, which requires much more investment in time, personally and societally, as well as resources. And now that's become the tick box, and you see all these university graduates who can't find jobs, but if you do want to find a job, you better have that degree, and then other things on top of that. So I think maybe we need to look at what the value of the degree actually is. Very interesting.
Do we want to address what can we all do here? Because we're talking so much about so many important issues, but at the end of the day, everything's going to be exactly the same unless we actually do something about it. Speaking from either like a smooth perspective, or from a student's perspective, or from like a community organization perspective, anything, just work, of course, us, because this affects us too.
I'll say that it's sort of the smooth sort of thing, I guess. So, like, for example, I think that if we want to, it seems like there is interest in this room, partly because of who are here, but like thinking about like more kind of interdisciplinary kind of programming, more opportunities to cross faculties and that kind of thing. I think we do have a pretty valuable resource in the University Senate, particularly our student senators. There are 13 of them, and they are kind of focused on the academic side of things. And so there's definitely opportunity. They do a lot of committee work, they do a lot of research, and kind of coming up with ideas about like how can we change the academic programming at the university. So I think that that's one thing that's super useful, and that body should be celebrated and supported a lot more than it currently is.
Just one quick addition before we move on to reading. We just heard, obviously, I think we're going to that, but the mannequin instructors earlier, so then it took them 10 years to even get an Aboriginal Studies major through. Minor, excuse me, thank you. Minor through, which is even worse, frankly, because a minor is so much smaller. Does that seem odd to you, or is it stereotypical? And obviously that seems excessive. Just ripping off that, I don't know what we think about that, but could that be changed as well?
That's McGill bureaucracy at its finest, right? Like that. I mean, complaining about McGill aside, right? But it's just universities, administration, like universities work slowly. Sorry, I don't. That's a very trite comment, but I don't have anything really substantial to say about that.
Okay.
The way I feel about it is, I agree that universities are very bureaucratic. You also have to ask yourself, why are they bureaucratic? And you have to look at the makeup of who's making the decisions, right? And who has that power. It's been proven when there are more women on a team, you're likely to move forward in a more, I don't like the word efficient, but a more empowering way. And people look at things be a part of, being a part of sort of like student union perspective. And I think the folks in the other room agree. Something I think is really needed at the university level is students need to be involved. And I don't mean administrators, I don't mean student leaders, but students who are like a part of the exec. Because whenever I go to like a student consultation, it's always your local student leaders and administrators. And we need to reach out to students who are actually studying day in and day out. These students who are actually in debt, right? Because there are a lot of people who are proposed tuition rates who are actually not in debt and can't relate or empathize as much. And it frustrates me, right, when we have like, and I admit to my own fault as well, we have student leaders who like run on this forum where they're like promoting, doing great things, but when they're actually in office, you don't actually see them interacting with students on a day-to-day basis. The last year when I was in summer, I probably spent more time in the office than going outside and being like, hey, how are you doing, right? But when it came to my campaign, I was very much into like showing students who I was. So we need to be like a lot less selfish and actually integrate with different individuals in different roles. Does that make sense?
Sorry, it's a little bit distracting over there.
Yeah, just go tell them we're having Yeah, and leave the door open because I don't think that's making a difference.
No,
That's right.
it's a divider here, right? That's what's going on.
I think we're really excited by this conversation.
Is that the Savoy Society still?
Oh, it could be. I thought it might be.
Savoy Society was up at the ballroom.
She's good.
What did you say? You're trying to
I
have
asked him to just take it down a notch and a half. They're improv, I think, so I think they're just trying to get something down, but at the same time, let's
Yeah.
be that excited about togas. It's not necessary. Great chance, but where were we? I actually know, I was distracted by togas.
I'm sure I was talking about
Well, I
getting
mean,
actual students.
Yeah, leadership.
Right. Word.
Very
much
obviously.
So,
Um,
sorry to interrupt, but I know it is important to get students who aren't generally involved to voice or to join the conversation, but what do you think needs to happen for that to happen? Because I mean, it's very nice to say that it needs to happen, but like, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of initiatives that do invite students to join the conversation, and forums are constantly open to the general public. At the same time, there aren't that many students, there aren't that many new voices coming in. So what do you think needs to happen for that to happen?
I think that like there's kind of on sort of two sides that I see that needs to be done. So one of those things is to reach out, I think, to new students a lot more. So for example, we have the General Assembly that's coming up on October 15th. And I think for sure from seeing how they worked over the course of the student movement recently, and just in general, I think that those are super important forums, and that like there isn't enough of a culture of General Assemblies at McGill, because it's sort of seen as this thing, oh, well, you're just going to go and like present the financial statements or choose the auditor or whatever, and then like maybe some ridiculous motion from like the engineers or whatever, and then people are going to like vote it down, and then they'll all leave, and then we lose quorum, and then we don't get to do anything, which really sucks, because it's such a good space to not only like actually make motions and mandate your student organizations to do things, but just to come together and talk about issues in a common way. Obviously there are issues in terms of like when it's being held, is that, you know, good for people, especially folks who like need to work or have families or whatever. There are also issues of like Robert's rules being like a real pain in the butt and super frustrating to deal with sometimes, and just generally confusing for a lot of people. But I think those are really important, and like, you know, I would be happy to spend like a few hours, like a couple of hours, like every day leading up to the General Assembly, like going to residences and talking about what it is, and like going to all the faculties and saying, hey, this is coming up, this is super important, like please come talk about these things. But I think there also needs to be work done on the other end in terms of showing that that kind of format does actually get results. And I think that there are issues in terms of like as a SMU exec, I'm realizing a lot that a lot of the work that we do, a lot of the things that we do in the office are not very transparent to people. And like, you know, you can definitely like read our reports and you can come to council and you can hear about those things. That's totally open for the most part, but also just like, yeah, being more present and like, you know, but yeah, but then I think there are also other things like, for example, like Board of Governors. You know, that's like the highest governing body of this university, and there are 2 voting seats for students. Like there are way more like partners in major corporations who have a say on that body than the students who are actually like have some of the biggest stake in the university's activities do. So yeah, I think we need to do more in terms of like promoting the mechanisms that we do have, and then also working more on like having more abilities to like get results, so that students are actually going to feel like putting that time and effort into like these conversations and whatever is going to do something for them.
I mean, it's always a big problem that students are incredibly disconnected, and that like a lot of people, certainly I have a large circle of friends that you know couldn't care less about student leadership, student politics, anything like that, just because they want to, you know, so many friends that said, you know, I'm here to come in, get a degree, and go out, right, and no real, just that sort of not getting involved, just sort of like, you know, dip in the pool and get out again, right, and it's not immersing themselves so much. So, and people don't get involved unless they feel that there's something that personally affects them very quickly. That's why when it came down to voting on whether to have a student strike or not, you had over 1,000 people coming out to the General Assembly, which is, I want to say it's unprecedented, but of course I don't know. But certainly it's enormous. Yeah, exactly. Certainly as far as
I think we all
remember.
know from the way that the reaction to that from the NUS space, I don't think anyone expected that.
No, right. But that's a good example of what it takes to get people involved, and they have to feel that there's something immediate and pressing that they need to deal with right now that they personally need to deal with, is the other problem. And for a lot of these things, right, it's really, you know, people go to a SMU council and they get a report on the SMU daycare. And the SMU daycare, I'm sure, is wonderful. I don't have kids, so I don't have a lot of. I don't know.
Every time.
I don't have a lot of experience with that, right? But it's just, you know, I don't have a lot of experience with that. I'm sure I can say with almost near certainty that nobody in this room has kids, right? So it's really, so people.
Secrets, you too.
Well, no.
So people go to a student council and they hear about that and they think, you know, what does this have to do with me? And it's still important. It's just people go, not my problem, and sort of back away and stuff like that. So it really is, people don't feel engaged because they feel like nothing's affected, and that's the problem. So.
On that level, I know that looking into the way that things like faculty and things like departments are structured at other universities, for UCAM and UDM, for example, a lot of things are done like at the departmental level. You hear a lot about, you know, the philosophy department at UDM is on strike, or they are having a G event, you know, turnout. But if you try to do that with SUS, tried to do that last semester here, and the turnout was miserable. Do you think that's a factor in like the level of organization, or like which departmental organization is having more power be a good thing at McGill, would it be a bad thing at McGill?
I mean, I don't think that's a departmental culture, is what I think. Maybe I like, you know, I don't know a lot about what's happening at UCAM, but certainly here at McGill, right? I know, as a history student, I know very, very few people in the Department of History. Most of my friends I know from other networks, from residents, from like sort of clubs and so on, right? So it's less possible to do things at the departmental level because people look at each other and don't say, you know, we're in this together. It's sort of like, there's no real sense of investment into what it is. It's just like, it's like a common interest or a hobby almost to people saying, you know, you're in history, I'm in history, that's cool, let's move on. So being able to handle things at the departmental level is not going to be possible until people feel that they're invested in a sort of, for lack of a better word, body politic.
Yeah, I think that what you say is true. There just isn't kind of that culture, but I think that it's just, I mean, I think even just the fact that like, okay, so last semester, like the strike was the big thing that got people organizing and having general assemblies and stuff, but like, you know, there were like people who came out to some of these general assemblies, and even if they didn't vote to strike, like that was like those departments were getting organized, and you know, now there's some speculation that some of the departments in the AUS might try and like become their own thing, sort of separate from the AUS. And so, that was kind of an interesting spark at McGill, where people did start having general assemblies and started to raise awareness about what that looks like and what that means, and the level of organization that it takes to do that. So, I mean, I think that it would be really cool if that's something that can continue to happen, especially if there's sort of, interest in shaking up the AUS a little bit. And I mean, it's interesting because like, I feel the same way, like in terms of like, I have friends who are in a lot of other departments or whatever, but like, I mean, when I meet somebody else who's in environment, especially like the same domain that I'm in environment, it's just like, awesome, like let's talk about this, you know? And then like, when I have friends who are in the same department or whatever, and they'll start talking about, oh, did you have this class with this professor? What do you think of the classes? What do you think of like the options that we have? What's missing in this department? I mean, those are super cool conversations for people to be having, and I think that if we can do that in something like a GA, where people could maybe like mandate their association to like advocate for this sort of class. Like coming back to the thing about the Native Studies program, I mean that was really a work of the Senate, I think, just some very dedicated senators who were doing that. But if we had like more general assemblies where it could be something talked about there, and then you'd have reached that many more students and maybe have more people who like want to get involved with that project. It's just, ways to sort of share these ideas or these projects that are going on, and then maybe bring more people together around them. And because academia is something that really does like govern a lot of our lives here, just to have people who are kind of sharing that same academic space, I think, is super valuable.
Any more thoughts or questions?
We are at 1:30.
I was going to stop at 1:45, like cut off completely, but if we want to end early, that's
But like really quick,
Yeah.
Going way back to the sort of beginning, touching on online education and distance learning as a potential solution, or at least part of the solution to improve access to education. I think Mr. Cook mentioned it's like McGill has gotten very late in the game in terms of offering online courses. Is that something you guys see as a potential type of solution?
I think online courses are great. They're not for me personally. I want to be in a classroom and sort of see what's going on with this. But I feel like universities like McGill can learn a lot from the SAGEP structure. I went to Vanny, for example. Vanny is representing. And we had like a lot of online courses. And I think that's very helpful because not everyone has the mobility to come to university, right? You might need to be at home. And most of your functions are best done at home. So that's very helpful. It's also helpful for students who can fit that in better. Like if you're at work and you only have 5 minutes to get to university, an online course may be better. So I think it's still a good way to move forward. I'm not sure if it's ideal. I think connecting with individuals is very important, but online is a way going to address some issues.
I think, I mean, it's a new field and the possibilities are still being explored, right? And there are, you know, there are problems and there are benefits, or there are advantages and there are disadvantages. It's, like, I couldn't comment on whether it's like a good solution right now because all the things don't know. Like, it really is, it's experimental, is what I have to say. So I definitely don't think universities should make I think it would be a mistake if people, like, if university tried to switch everything over.
Right, yeah.
And, you know, I was in the States recently, and I remember seeing all these advertisements for, you know, get your degree online, like it's all online, and I get really suspicious of that. Because that is, I find that like a little bit questionable, a little bit hard to believe, and so it really is, again, it's something to work with, it's something to look at. I don't think it's something to embrace right away.
The irony is that this is actually going to be going online. So hopefully.
So watch what you take away from this.
So hopefully there will be some discussion about this. UBC has been remarkably quiet on something because they're all about 3 hours behind us. But we'll definitely let you know where this goes. If you want to come back and check and see what people are saying about what we've said here today, or see if there's any more voices joining our discussion, I would encourage you to do that. Obviously, on links such in the near future. But until then, I think that's it for us. Anybody last words? No? Thanks for doing